you take my bag inside right now and don't touch it with your filthy hands. And you, what are you waiting for? Carry my books inside, quick and properly this time. Yeah. Do I have to teach you dumbheads everything?
The two maids hurried away with their heads bowed and feet moving fast like people running from trouble, while Rachael walked ahead without turning back or caring about what people thought. If you've ever wondered how ill-mannered a rich teenage girl can be, meet Rachael Adebanjo, the most spoiled, rude, and lazy 17-year-old you would find in all of Lagos. A girl who looked perfect on the outside, with long, fancy braids, always neatly packed, smooth skin, and a phone that never left her hand. But her heart was filled with pride and disrespect, because she was born into money and raised in excess. She grew up in a big house where drivers waited every morning to take her wherever she wanted. Maids rushed at her every call, and nothing was ever too hard or too much for her to get. So she never learned how to work. She never learned patience or even respect. Her parents were not exempted either, because Rachael hardly listened to them whenever they tried to correct her. Not because she was stronger than them, but because they were hardly around, always traveling for business and rushing to meetings, so corrections came late or not at all. And Rachael learned very early that nobody stayed long enough to enforce their words, so she ignored advice the same way she ignored rules. And at school, her name alone made the teachers sigh. One day when she failed to submit an assignment, her teacher scolded her in front of the class. She laughed lightly and said, "The assignment is not food, and I can do it whenever I like," making the class gasp in shock, even though they were already used to her behavior. And when the teacher warned her again, she shrugged and added, "You have no right to tell me what I can and cannot do, because you do not know who I am." This led to her being reported to the principal. But even in the principal's office, she showed no fear, sitting carelessly and looking around like she didn't belong there. She answered the principal's question carelessly and rudely, because in her mind, corrections was for people without money. And even among her classmates, she was known, not loved, because she spoke anyhow and acted like everyone was beneath her. She was always snapping at the saleswoman in the school's cafeteria during lunch, cutting lines, talking rudely, and walking away like it was normal. So whether at home, in class, or during lunch, Rachael moved through life the same way, loud, careless, unchecked, believing she could do anything and still be fine, or so she thought. Rachael's final straw did not come quietly. It came loudly, the kind of loud that finally forced her parents to stop pretending things were under control. One evening after returning from yet another trip, they were called urgently from her school. And this time it was not just about assignments or rude words. It was about the way Rachael had openly insulted a guest speaker in front of the students and visitors during a school function, talking with so much pride and anger that even people who knew her family name shook their head in disgust. The school suspended her for months and asked her parents to come and pick her up. Her parents arrived and tried to scold her in the car. She brushed them off again, saying, "I'm tired and I don't want to hear anything. You people are never around and never care about me anyway, so don't start acting like parents now." The silence in the car became heavy, and her parents realized that it was not just the rudeness that was the problem. It was their absence too. The many trips, the missed moments, and the way money had replaced their presence in her life. So that night, they sat in the living room with her, without shouting, without anger, just tired faces and firm voices. Her father said, "Things can no longer continue like this, Rachael. You need discipline, real discipline. We know we can't give you that from airports and boardrooms, so we have come to a conclusion." Then her mother added quietly that she would be going to live with her auntie in Shagamu, Auntie Bimpe, a woman known in the family for her strict ways and no-nonsense life. And the moment Rachael heard it, she laughed sharply thinking it was a joke. But when she saw that things were serious, Her voice rose. She refused and shouted, saying, "I will never go to that place. You don't have the right to send me there because I am no longer a child. How do you expect me to survive in that slum? I promise to embarrass you the more if you try anything funny." She paced around the room talking with so much anger and disbelief. But her parents did not argue, and they did not shout. They only told her their decision had been made. And days later, despite all her protests, despite her silence and anger, she found herself in the car again, and this time with a suitcase she did not pack happily, driving far away from the comforts she knew, away from the big house, away from the drivers and soft life, until the roads and surroundings changed. And when the car finally stopped, she stepped down, looked around, and took what was before her. She froze because she never expected what she saw, and in that moment, it felt like she had walked into straight horror. Rachael stepped out of the car, her nose in the air, arms crossed, and a scowl firmly planted on her face as she looked at the decent house in Shagamu, thinking about how unfair it was that her life had gone from comfort to this. She dragged her suitcase behind her like it was a punishment, her feet kicking small stones along the dusty path. Auntie Bimpe came out from the porch with a gentle smile, waving her hand softly as she sighted Rachael. "Welcome, my dear. You must be so tired after the long journey. Come in and rest a little." Rachael rolled her eyes in disgust. "Rest? I don't need rest. I need my house, my room, my bed, and everything I'm used to, not this hellhole." Auntie Bimpe stepped aside, calmly letting her in. She did not react or complain. She merely observed as she moved, noticing the way she sniffed, looked at everything as if it were trash. She sighed quietly to herself, knowing that patience would be needed here, because Rachael had no idea what discipline was. Rachael flopped herself onto the sofa in the living room, tossing her bag to the side carelessly while glaring at the modest decor. She muttered quietly to herself, "This place is so old, so small. I can't even breathe properly. Ugh, so disgusting." Auntie Bimpe sat down nearby, keeping her calm, and she replied gently, "You will get used to it soon, my dear, and you will see that this place is not as bad as you think, but we will take it one step at a time." Rachael rolled her eyes, tapping her foot impatiently against the sofa. Soon, Auntie Bimpe guided her to the room, opening the door and saying softly, "This will be your room. You can settle in and put your things down, and then we can talk about what tomorrow will be like." Rachael was horrified at how small her room was compared to where she was coming from. Auntie Bimpe quietly left the room, closing the door gently and letting her feel the silence and stew in the discomfort. Rachael sat on the bed fuming. She swore never to forgive her parents for bringing her to such a terrible place as this. And as she peeked through the window at the neat yard, she observed the quiet trees, the sound of distant voices, and everything felt so ordinary to her. She lay down back on the bed and cried profusely till she slept off. Outside, the sun dipped lower in the sky, and Auntie Bimpe moved around the house, cooking, organizing, and quietly preparing Rachael for her first full day, smiling gently to herself because she understood that for someone like Rachael, the first day would be very hard and shocking, realizing that this was nothing like the life she knew. She laughed to herself, knowing fully well that Rachael had no idea what was coming, and would definitely not expect what she would face in the coming days, because this was only the beginning. Rachael was still sleeping heavily when the morning came, unaware that the sky outside was already changing color, as she did not wake up since she cried herself to sleep. She was lost in dreams of her old soft life. Auntie Bimpe entered quietly and stood beside the bed, gently waking Rachael up. But as she expected, Rachael ignored her, and then she reached out for a small bowl of cold water she had brought along, and without warning, she poured it straight on Rachael's face. The shock made Rachael scream and jump instantly, gasping and shaking as the water soaked her hair and clothes. "Are you crazy?" She shouted angrily as she wiped her face roughly, and before she could continue shouting, Auntie Bimpe grabbed her gently but firmly by the ear and pulled her out of the bed just enough to make her understand that this morning was not for arguments. And she said in a steady voice, "It's 5 o'clock, and you need to get some things done before the break of the day." And Richard cried out in pain, struggling and insulting, "You have no right to touch me. Who do you think you are?" But Auntie Bimpe released her calmly and stepped back, replying, "Wash your face and come outside." Then she walked away, leaving Rachael shaking with rage and disbelief. And when she finally came outside, her eyes were red and her body was stiff. Auntie Bimpe placed a broom in her hand and told her to sweep the compound, which made Rachael laugh loudly and mockingly, because she had never done such work in her life. But when she refused, Auntie Bimpe said nothing and simply stood there watching, and the silence became heavy and uncomfortable, forcing Rachael to start sweeping angrily, pushing the dirt around carelessly, obviously doing rubbish. Then she rudely announced that she was done. But Auntie Bimpe looked at the ground and told her to sweep again. And when Rachael protested, she did not argue. She just watched with a stern look on her face. So Rachael swept again carelessly still, and she was told to repeat it again and again until sweat ran down her face and her arms and back burned. And by the 5th time, she swept slowly and carefully, picking even the smallest dirts. Then Auntie Bimpe finally nodded. Rachael felt something break inside her, because no one had ever made her repeat or do any work before. No one had ever stood firm without fear. And the day continued like that, with washing plates that she eventually had to rewash, fetching water and doing other major chores. And every time she talked back, nothing changed. She thought about the work she would still have to do and knew it would not be gentle either. By the time evening came that first day, Rachel's body was so tired that even anger could not sit properly inside her again. Her legs were weak and her arms were heavy. As she sat quietly on the edge of the chair while Auntie Bimpe placed the food on the table, instead of rushing to eat like she usually would, Rachael only stared at the plate, her fear mixing with hunger, because she was not sure if she was allowed to eat yet, or if there was another rule she did not know of. And when Auntie Bimpe noticed this, she said firmly, "Sit well and eat." Rachael quickly obeyed, lowering her head and eating slowly. And after eating, instead of walking away as usual, she stood there unsure of what to do until Auntie Bimpe told her to wash the plates, watching her closely as she did it. Auntie Bimpe began cooking for the next day. She called Rachael to stand beside her, not to start cooking yet, but to watch her, carefully explaining each step slowly, showing her how to wash vegetables, how to light gas, and other related stuff. Even though Rachael seemed tired, Auntie Bimpe did not excuse her. She made her stand there until she had finished, and by the time she went to bed that night, Rachael slept like someone who had fought a long battle, only to be dragged out of sleep again the next morning by the same cold water poured on her face, because she overslept, and this time, she did not scream as loud as before. She only groaned and dragged herself up with fear already sitting in her chest. And the days continued like that, morning after morning, chore after chore, repetition after repetition, until her pride slowly began to fade. Not because she wanted to change, but because she was scared of what would happen if she did not obey. And by the 2nd week of her stay, some things began to shift quietly. She no longer argued loudly, she woke up faster, swept carefully, and washed plates properly without being told twice. And when Auntie Bimpe resumed work, she would leave Rachael with clear tasks to complete before she returned: sweeping, cooking simple food, fetching water, arranging the house, and Rachael did them seriously, not with joy, but with focus, because she learned that mistakes came with consequences, and though her heart was still heavy, her mouth was no longer sharp. She moved through the house with caution and fear, knowing very well that in that place, laziness had no hiding place, and pride had no protection. She also realized very early enough that Auntie Bimpe did not need to shout to be obeyed. After about a month and some weeks had passed, the house in Shagamu no longer felt like a place of punishment to Rachael, but a place of routine and quiet learning. She could now handle chores responsibly without being watched, and even wake up early on her own before Auntie Bimpe knocked. The work that once felt heavy was now normal, and the relationship between the two of them had also changed, not with fear or shouting, but with understanding. One evening while they were cooking together, Rachael accidentally dropped a spoon and she laughed at herself. She said, "If this was my first week here, Auntie Bimpe, I would have panicked." And Auntie Bimpe laughed and replied, "But now you know mistakes are part of learning, right?" And they both laughed lightly, the sound filling the small kitchen. Later during that night at dinner, they talked freely and Rachael asked a simple but serious question. "Auntie, how did you learn to be this hardworking and strong at the same time?" And Auntie Bimpe answered slowly, "Life taught me that because nobody is born responsible. We are just trained to be." And Rachael nodded thoughtfully before saying, "I used to think that people who worked hard were suffering, but now I see that it is what makes them stand out." And Auntie Bimpe looked at her with pride and said, "That is growth, my dear. You are learning, and I am proud of it." The night ended with jokes, small stories, and shared laughter. As Rachael washed the plates carefully and arranged it in the kitchen before bed, she did not do it because she was scared or forced, but because it was part of who she was becoming. And when she lay on her bed that night, looking around the small room that once made her cry, she smiled softly, realizing that though the house was simple, it had taught her discipline, patience, and respect. By this time, her suspension was almost over, and the days began to calm down quietly. Her time in Shagamu settled gently into her heart, complete and unbroken. Rachel's last morning in Shagamu came swiftly, and before the sun fully rose, she was already awake, helping Auntie Bimpe with chores before she left. Soon, the sound of the car horn came from outside. Rachael knew it was time for her to go, and she turned to Auntie Bimpe and said in shaking voice, "Auntie, it's time." And Auntie Bimpe nodded calmly and replied, "Yes, my dear. Your father has sent the driver." And as Rachael carried her bag to the door, she dropped it suddenly and hugged Auntie Bimpe tightly, holding her like she was afraid to let go. "I don't want to go. I will miss you. You changed my life. And say, I promise I will come back during the holidays. I promise I won't forget everything you have taught me." And Auntie Bimpe placed a hand on Rachel's back, holding her firmly and saying, "I know, my dear. I will miss you too. But remember this, wherever you go, respect people, work hard, and never think you are better than anyone. Comfort can return, but discipline must stay." And Rachael nodded repeatedly, wiping her tears. She picked her bag and walked to the waiting car. And as she opened the door, she looked at the driver and greeted him softly. "Good morning, sir," making the man pause in surprise for a second time before answering, "Good morning, madam." His eyes following her with a quiet confusion as she sat properly and thanked him for coming early. The drive back to Lagos was long, and Rachael sat quietly, looking out the window and just thinking. When they finally arrived at her family house, the gate opened wide as usual, and the maid rushed out to welcome her. But this time, they froze in shock when Rachael greeted them calmly one after the other, saying, "Good afternoon," and even adding a quiet thank you when one of them took her bag, leaving them staring at each other in belief, because this was not the Rachael they knew. And as she walked into the house, the walls, the furniture, and the comforts were the same. But Rachael herself was different, and the house felt like it was meeting a new version of her for the first time. The next day, Rachel's parents returned from their trip, and the moment she saw them, her face lit up. She ran towards them and threw her arms around them, hugging them tightly. "Welcome back, Daddy. Welcome back, Mommy. I've missed you so much," she said softly. her voice filled with warmth and respect. Her parents were surprised by the change in her tone and behavior. Although they were shocked, they hugged her back, deeply happy. Later that evening, as they all sat down to eat dinner, Rachael could hardly wait to talk about her stay at Auntie Binkbe's house. She spoke excitedly about her stay there, telling them what she learned, the routines she adjusted to, and how the experience had changed the way she saw life and people. She spoke freely, calmly, and with sincerity. Her parents listened quietly, exchanging glances. Her father looked at her with pride and said, "Rachael, I am truly impressed. You have grown so much in a short time, and I am proud of you for taking responsibility and learning." Her mother nodded in agreement, adding, "Yes, we can see the difference. Keep it up, my lovely angel." Rachael smiled quietly, feeling the warmth of their approval. That Sunday night, she prepared for school on her own, carefully arranging her uniform, cleaning her shoes, and packing her bag neatly without anyone telling her to do it. And by the next morning, she woke up early, dressed up, and walked out calmly, surprising everyone in the house with how composed and ready she was. When she arrived at school, she did not go straight to her classroom immediately. Instead, she walked straight to the principal's office, knocked gently, and stepped in. "Good morning, ma," she said respectfully, bowing her head slightly. The principal looked up and was amazed at how polite and calm she seemed. "Good morning, Rachael. Welcome back to school," she replied. Rachael took a deep breath and said, "Ma, I came to sincerely apologize for my past behavior. I know I was disrespectful and I treated people wrongly. I'm sorry for all the times I hurt and embarrassed anyone, and I understand now that everyone deserves respect." The principal's eyes softened. "It takes courage to admit your mistakes, Rachael, and I am proud of you for recognizing that." Rachael nodded and replied, "Thank you, ma. Lastly, I would like to apologize publicly to everyone at the assembly if you would allow me." The principal smiled warmly. "You may do so, my dear. You have my permission." At the assembly ground, the coordinator announced that Rachael Adebanjo had something to say to everyone. The hall was silent for a moment, and some students whispered amongst themselves, expecting her to brag or show off. But when Rachael stepped forward, she spoke with honesty and humility, apologizing to her teachers for disrespect, to her classmates for pride and spoiled behavior, and to everyone she looked down on, admitting that her character had been wrong and that she now understood that no one deserves to be treated badly. She spoke clearly, her voice calm but heartfelt. "I know I made many mistakes. I was rude, lazy, and full of pride. I treated people unfairly and I am sorry for that. I have learned now that respect, kindness, and hard work are what matter. I hope you can forgive me for my past behavior." There was an awkward chill in the hall for a moment, and then slowly, the teachers stood and clapped, and the students followed, smiling with relief. And soon, the whole assembly was applauding her sincerely, because they could see that she had truly changed. That day, everyone left the hall with a lesson they would never forget. And it's that change is possible for anyone who is willing to humble themselves and learn. And that pride does not make anyone better than others, but respect and kindness are the true marks of a person.
If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe. And let us know in the comments section if you've met someone like Rachael and what your experience with them was. Until next time, bye-bye.